To what extent did World War II see the total mobilization of resources? Resource: a stock or supply of money, materials, staff, and other assets that can be drawn on by a person or organization in order to function effectively. On June 6, 1944, the Allied invasion of France commences, Operation Overlord. This is a prime example of the total mobilization of resources in World War II. 326,000 British, American, and Canadian soldiers landed in Normandy on the first day alone. To supply those soldiers, the Mulberry Harbors were built. Mulberry Harbors were temporary portable harbors developed by the British during World War II to facilitate the rapid offloading of cargo onto the beaches during the Allied invasion of Normandy in June 1944. The harbors required much attention to detail in order to make concrete float. Overall, it took 7 months to build, requiring a massive amount of resources and research.
Vast artificial harbors, secretly prefabricated in Britain by thousands of workers, helped to make possible the invasion of Normandy. 2 fully equipped ports, as large and impregnable as Gibraltar, with huge steel and concrete caissons looking like floating blocks of flats, these were built in 7 months and towed to Normandy in sections 3 days after our landings.
The Navy and the Air Force were also completely mobilized, and more naval and aerial assets were being mass-produced. The Allied Armada, which crossed the Channel in the night of June 5th and 6th, comprised no fewer than 4,300 ships of all shapes and sizes. For their part, the troop ships carried 130,000 men and more than 20,000 vehicles of all kinds, including tanks and lorries, across the Channel to the Normandy coast in the course of June 6th.
Die Schlachtschiffe Gneisenau und Scharnhorst folgen einander in Kiellinie. Mit 26.000 Tonnen sind sie zurzeit unsere stärksten Schiffe.
The Air Force grew immensely. In 1939, total aircraft production for the US military was less than 3,000 planes. By the end of the war, America produced 300,000 planes. No war was more industrialized than World War II. It was a war won as much by machine shops as by machine guns. In January 1939, Roosevelt appealed to Congress for $300 million to be spent on the procuring aircraft for the Army Air Corps. At the time of the Corps had approximately 1,700 aircraft in total. Congress responded and authorized the procurement of 3,251 aircraft. The oil supplying the Allied vehicles came from Operation Pluto. It was a Second World War operation by the British engineers, oil companies, and the British Armed Forces to construct undersea oil pipelines under the English Channel between England and France in support of Operation Overlord. The Allied invasion of Normandy in June 1944.
This is steel piping, which is not swept away by tides and which resists the corrosive effect of salt water. With the invading armies, these ships went, and from the enormous reels wound out the pipe into the sea, from England all the way to France.
Human resources were completely mobilized in World War II. During World War II, women worked in factories producing munitions, building ships, aeroplanes, in the auxiliary services as air raid wardens, fire officers, and evacuation officers, as drivers of fire engines, trains, and trams, as conductors, and as nurses.
And American women are beginning to join the night shift, doing the jobs of men. British women have been at it for 3 years, 10-hour shifts, night and day.
According to the 1939 film Britannia as Woman, the main goal was to Between 1914 and 1918, hundreds of British factories altered their functions to make munitions. Over 890,000 women, teenagers, wives, mothers, and even grandmothers joined the 2 million already working in factories. They filled the gap left by volunteer and later conscripted servicemen, many taking on jobs once believed to be too strenuous for women.
Then there are women who actually pilot airplanes in wartime. They fly new machines from factory to aerodrome. Surely one of the most adventurous jobs which has so far fallen to the fair sex.
The Germans utilized children known as Hitlerjungen. In the 1st Battalion, for example, 65% were under 18 years old, only 3% were over 25, and almost all of these older soldiers were officers and non-coms. No resource was spared. Inhumane means were used to clear the trenches, and the Germans invented the Flammenwerfer, otherwise known as the flamethrower. The results were horrifying. Carried by specially trained assault teams, German flamethrowers were highly effective weapons that could either drive men from their defensive positions or simply incinerate them. When the nozzles were lighted, they threw out a roaring, hissing flame 20 or 30 feet long, swelling at the end to an oily rose, 6 feet in diameter. Guy Chapman, a British infantryman at Passchendaele, recalled years later in an account about one such assault. Under the protection of these hideous weapons, the enemy surrounded the advanced pillbox, stormed it, and killed the garrison.
The Germans extensively used their air force to destroy British cities. Adolf Hitler and his right-hand man, Goering, commander-in-chief of Luftwaffe, ordered the new policy on the 6th of September 1940. From the 7th of September 1940, London was systematically bombed by the Luftwaffe for 56 out of the following 57 days and nights. Most notable was a large daylight attack against London on the 15th of September.
Fires which burned for 5 days. Not since the Tooley Street fire of 1861 had South London endured such widespread destruction. On the North Bank, cargoes of flour, paint, rubber and sugar sent an inferno of flames into the night sky, which was visible for miles around.
During war, the economy has to be geared towards war efforts in World War II. More than 15 million Americans eventually served in the military. Training and supplying them was a staggering challenge. It took more than 6,000 people to provide food, equipment, and medical services, as well as transportation to 8,000 soldiers. In addition, many raw materials such as rubber, manila fiber, and oil were in short supply. And to top it off, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt was a great leader, but not a great administrator. Nevertheless, Americans rose to the occasion. When FDR called for the production of 50,000 planes in a year, it was thought to be ridiculous. By 1944, the country was producing 96,000 a year. Technology blossomed.
Bei der Bewaffnung benötigt die Truppe noch zahllose Ausrüstungsgegenstände verschiedenster Art. Hier Trinkwasserbehälter. An alles ist gedacht.
Colonial soldiers were deployed by the French, despite the rampant racism amongst the soldiers.
To increase production and enforce maximum use of economic resources, Britain introduced DORA, Defense of Realm Act. This resulted in citizens being subject to greater government influence. DORA allowed the government to restrict pub times, use of binoculars, lighting of bonfires, and more influence overall.
Des deutschen Volkes. Wenn wir selbst dieses deutsche Volk emporführen durch eigene Arbeit, durch eigenen Fleiß, eigene Entschlossenheit, eigenen Trotz, eigene Beharrlichkeit, dann werden wir wieder emporsteigen, genau wie die Väter einst aus Deutschland nicht Geschenke hielten, sondern selbst den Schlapp mussten.
Back at home, the US also spent a lot in the propaganda department. The government viewed it as them simply giving out information as opposed to propaganda. Agencies were created to help aid in the writing and distribution of propaganda. Two of the largest agencies involved were the Writer War Board and the United States Office of War Information. The Writers' War Board handled the actual writing of propaganda and was made up of infamous American writers. The United States Office of War Information had one purpose: to deliver propaganda anywhere they could. This agency put propaganda through Hollywood studios, radio, and posters. The agency was a success, but was dissolved following the end of war in September of 1945.
Over here are honorable aircraft spotter. Now we are showing you fire prevention headquarters. Oh, Canada, too late.
Commerce raiding, tonnage war, unrestricted submarine warfare, the use of civilians and prisoners of war as forced labor for military operations, mass production of military assets, full mobilization of the population, propaganda ministries established, and full use of arsenal. To what extent did World War II see the mobilization of resources? To the fullest extent.